Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I have a topic I want to dive into, and that's around the topic of post-fat loss diet. Should you do more of a recovery diet or should you do more of a reverse diet? And we'll dive into what both of those mean here coming up. But first, before I dive into that, if you want to learn more about a body recomp, what it is, 10 things you need for a body recomp, then my free checklist is for you. The link to that is in the show notes. So make sure you go and check that out. Again, I go over 10 things you need for a body recomp, what is a body recomp, the two different types, and why it's important to focus on body composition. So you'll have all the tools you'll need to improve your body composition and recomp, build more muscle and lose some body fat. So again, go check that out. That is in the show notes. All right. So what I want to talk about today is post diet or post fat loss. Like what's going to be better, recovery or a reverse diet, right? People will do both of those, and each one has its benefit there, right? Like I've seen, oh, hey, you should do a recovery diet because of these reasons. Or again, maybe people preach more reverse dieting's better. But then there's also, again, some misconceptions around reverse dieting. And again, it's our expectations around it. And so I want to go over what this looks like and how really I don't default to textbook recovery diets or reverse diets for every client, right? I don't coach textbooks, I coach humans. So what that means is I account for all the things, right? Stress, digestion, tracking accuracy, current body composition, your current physiology and lifestyle, and all things that, that can get ignored when you really only focus on theory and just, hey, you should do a recovery diet or hey, you should do a reverse diet. And so we'll talk about that specifically. So again, just to go over, so generally there's two main approaches that people will have. They have recovery diet, which is return immediately to your estimated maintenance, or even in some situations, you'll see people be like, hey, go even higher than that. And then we have reverse diet. And this is where we incrementally add calories week by week. And a lot of times it's very slow increase in calories. And people will do this and they start eating more calories. And for some people, they'll basically the whole kind of thought behind it was, hey, you can do this and you can stay lean and maybe even get leaner while you are doing this. And again, I think some of the expectations there are definitely overblown, but we'll talk about where doing a more incremental versus recovery diet may be more beneficial and which one may be better for you, because again, I think it really depends on the person there. So while recovery diets may make sense from a physiological or theoretical perspective, to me that doesn't always translate to what works best for every client, right? Because the thought behind the recovery diet is by going straight back to maintenance or higher, you're getting out of that maybe no man's land of deficit and you can recover, right? Which again, I definitely think there's some merit to that, and getting out of the deficit is going to be super important. There's some nuances within that could get overlooked. And so in most situations, for most people who are Gen Pop clients, right? People that are into fitness, but maybe not necessarily competitors. And again, just most people over 30, just based on what most people's body composition is, I'm going to lean towards a more gradual increase in calories versus going straight to maintenance or higher post diet there. And here's a few reasons why. So this is why I'm going to do that over the recovery diet. Because again, recovery diet can help from a recovery standpoint. And I think from a physiological standpoint and theoretical perspective, definitely makes sense that getting back to maintenance right away versus prolonging that process would be better. But here's some situations where this may not be great and that can backfire for some people. So one would be digestive health concerns. So many clients are not going to tolerate a large calorie jump. So that's going to be the thing from going from a deficit to, if you take the recovery diet approach, is you're probably going to be going up anywhere from 3, 4, 5, 600 calories. And that can be a lot on somebody's gut, especially for people who are over 30. And if you already have a decent amount of stress, because stress and age are going to reduce stomach acid and impair digestion, again, especially for those 30 plus. And so a sudden jump in food volume and food overall can cause bloating and digestion and discomfort for some people. And food quality is also a huge factor here in both ways, right? If you make a 300 to 600 calorie jump of just whole foods, that could be a lot on the gut. But then also if you make just a 300 to 500, 600, 700 calorie increase of highly processed foods, that could also irritate the gut as well too. So I think from a digestive health perspective, I would be careful with adding in a ton of calories right off the bat. For some people, it wouldn't be a big deal, but for some people it would be. Again, most people, like I said, in this age range, there's probably going to be some things from a gut health perspective that are not getting dialed in. And so we'd want to make sure that is in the right spot. From a digestive perspective, that's the first one. Again, from a theoretical standpoint, yeah, you might be able to erase the deficit, get your body out of a deficit sooner, not considering the digestive health and GI health of somebody. And so we do need to consider that. And the downside with this is now you get someone that maybe increases calories because they feel like they need to do that. They heard, hey, I need to do a recovery diet. And now they're forcing food through a GI system that is not running smoothly, and you're looking at even more strain on the gut. You're looking at you're not absorbing the nutrients, and or your body's going to, from a body comp perspective, or it's probably not going to utilize those nutrients as well towards muscle. So we want to be careful with, just to me, anytime, I know for me back in the day when I would try to hammer in calories to eat more calories to, hey, that's needed to be in a surplus to build muscle. I always got to this point to where my gut health did get compromised, and at that point, that's when my physique went downhill in my building phases, was when I did that. And I think there's something to that, to where it's okay, hey, your body's telling you something here. So again, I think from a GI perspective, slowly increasing calories is going to be more helpful for a lot of people. And yes, that means you could be slightly prolonging the deficit, but this is where I think if you have everything else dialed in, and again, somebody's current body composition is going to be super important here. Somebody that is 10% or sorry, 8% body fat is for men, 18 or lower for women, that's going to be a bigger player than the deficit itself. Whereas you take someone who says 25% at the end of their fat loss phase, maybe 12, 13, 14% for men, they have a little bit more wiggle room here they're not, that deficit's not going to be as big of a stressor on them. And the deficit is theoretically going to get smaller and smaller in most situations. And so that deficit is lower. So I think the stressor that is being placed on the body as the deficit gets smaller and smaller is going to be smaller and smaller as well. Number two, thyroid dysfunction isn't always calorie driven. So that's one thing where when you get back to maintenance, okay, so when you're in a deficit, thyroid may decrease. And then that's again also dependent on your body fat levels. When you reverse and get out of a deficit, when you get back to maintenance, so you can see your thyroid get back to normal fairly quickly. But that's if the thyroid issue is from the energy deficit itself, right? Because not all thyroid issues stem from just low energy intake. So again, we know energy deficits can impact thyroid hormones. Again, stress, poor gut health, and micronutrient deficiencies may be just as big of a player. So again, if we have high stress and then we increase our calories up back to maintenance, you may not improve your thyroid function, right? Maybe you have poor gut health and you also try to ramp up calories. Again, you may not be absorbing the nutrients that your body needs, and gut issues can impact your thyroid health. And so you may be increasing calories back to your theoretical maintenance, but you still may not be improving your thyroid, right? And then from a micronutrient standpoint, things like selenium are super important. B vitamins are going to be important, right? Like having a good base of micronutrition is going to be super helpful. And so if you just increase your calories and you're not focused on that, but that's the reason that you may have some thyroid issues, then that's going to be the thing that's still going to be problematic, not necessarily the energy balance you're in. So again, that's a thing that I've heard of. Hey, if you go back to maintenance right away, your thyroid will be in a much better spot. And so that's a reason for doing a reverse diet, is for that. And again, for some people, that's definitely the case. Like their thyroid is lower because of the energy deficit. But if these other things are not taken care of, that could be the reason the thyroid is low, right? So again, simply jumping to maintenance calories won't automatically resolve these. This is why some people increase calories and just gain body fat, because if your thyroid is still problematic, right? Say it's from either stress or from poor gut health or micronutrient deficiencies, and it's still not necessarily running as smooth as it should be, you could be increasing your calories and your total daily energy expenditure is going to be a bit lower. So your estimated maintenance is going to be lower and you're going to be in a surplus. And this is where people that, maybe they hear, oh, hey, I need to increase my calories, but they don't have this taken care of, they could start to be in a larger surplus than they think, which means they're going to gain body fat a lot quicker, right? So we would just want to make sure that what is the reason for the thyroid? Is it the energy deficit? Potentially. I think if you have the combination of low body fat and low energy intake, that's a lot higher of a risk. If it's just low energy intake, that may not be everything. It could be why your thyroid's down, but it may not be everything. And the only reason, again, stress, poor gut health, and micronutrients deficiencies may be just as big or the bigger players as to why that's the case. And so you can increase your calories all you want. Your thyroid's not going to come up until those get taken care of there. So again, just going to recovery diet and doing maintenance may not take care of that. And you may just be putting on more body fat in the process. Number three, real world tracking is messy. So we are notoriously poor at tracking calories. So i.e. what you think is 1,600 calories maybe closer to 2,000 calories on average. And what you think is 2,200, maybe closer to 2,600. But then also on top of it, not to mention post-diet, people are often mentally fatigued from tracking. So they're more likely to be like, oh, I'm out of a fat loss phase. I'm just going to wing this a bit more. They're not going to cross their T's and dot their I's like they did. They may be less consistent or accurate with their tracking for those reasons. And we're more likely to add in back more fun and tasty foods during this period of time because, hey, most people really decrease that during that time. So we're talking more processed, palatable, high calorie foods, which are going to be easy to eat more than you think, right? And so that leads to this, hey, you may be thinking you're eating 1,600, but it's closer to 2,000. And so what this means is this makes sudden calorie increase increases a high risk time for accidental overeating, especially with hyperpalatable tasty foods. And so now you're going to have this higher risk of large calorie surplus and overshooting. So we need to be careful with that, because if you tell someone that they were eating 1600 and now, their estimated maintenance is 2200, and you get them to there, if you combine all these things that I just talked about, they could be tracking 2200, but really they're eating 2600, and now they're in a surplus, and now they start gaining more body fat. In the short term, you're not going to notice it, but a week or two, 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line, you are going to start to notice that. I think we just need to be careful. That's another thing where, again, in theory, it's yes, getting to maintenance is going to be super helpful, but how's that actually going to work in the real world, understanding that people are going to tend to underestimate. Again, research backs this up, and also just the environment you're in post-diet of things are going to taste better. We're more likely to have tasty food. Again, it's just that magic formula to have a higher caloric intake there, which could lead to a surplus. And now, yes, you recover from the diet, but now you're gaining more body fat than you need to. And then people will jump back into a deficit. And that leads me to number 4, which is overshooting calories can backfire long term. So jumping too high too fast can lead to one, rapid weight regain for the reasons I just mentioned, for the gut health, maybe your thyroid's still not in a good spot, and or you're overshooting calories from a tracking perspective, whether it's accidental or on purpose. And this is going to lead to, again, the weight regain, discomfort or bloating, emotional distress, leading to restrictive quote unquote fixes, which leads to a cycle of cut, binge, cut, guilt, right? So it's this vicious cycle of, okay, now I've overshot. Now I need to go back, decrease my calories again. Now you're back in a deficit at that point, right? And so now this can leave people stuck or afraid to ever raise calories again. And now they end up being in this low caloric state, which, again, in theory, you do a recovery diet. Yeah, it makes sense. Like, you get them out of it as soon as possible and they're good to go. But if all these things are now also happening, then the thing that you are trying to help with it, getting them back to normal calories, it may go backwards from that perspective. And now they're going to always want to be in this binge restrict cycle or decrease their calories, cut their calories, and be in this low energy intake for extended periods of time, which can become problematic. And then I hinted at this earlier, but number 5 is body fat levels matter more than the deficit alone. So yes, deficits are a stressor on the body. Anytime we're in an energy deficit, that is going to be a stressor on the body. But in my opinion, and based on my understanding, the body fat percentage is the biggest lever, right? And I think the body fat percentage is, okay, where's your body fat percentage at relative to where it was recently at? So I think anytime you make a large jump, yes, overall body fat levels do matter, like where you're at, right? Being at 8% versus 20% is going to put your body in a much different position in many different factors, right? Hormonally, how things taste, it's going to be completely different from that. But I do think even if you go from say 30 to say 15% body fat, like that's a pretty big jump. You're probably going to start to notice some things here where maybe thyroid is downregulated. It is a larger stressor on the body because you are in a completely different state. So you probably would need to take a break at some point before you keep pushing down. But overall body fat levels are more important than the deficit. Now, if your deficit is you're eating 500 calories a day and you're losing 4 pounds a week, that is going to be a huge stressor on the body. We're talking within reason here in terms of the deficit, but any deficit that people can sustain for extended periods of time is not going to be as big of a stressor on the body as the body fat level that you are at. Because again, once you get, say, for men, under 10% body fat, for women, under 20%, these are just crude numbers. That's when you start to run into libido decreases. Now you start to see hormonal imbalances. For men, testosterone drops, hunger goes through the roof. You start to get super tired. You don't want to move. Your body doesn't want to move as much. It's just basically your body's conserving. It's now going into more of a mode of it wants to conserve as much energy as possible, and things that aren't survival based now become lower on the priority list because your body senses that energy deficit and it senses its reserves, its energy reserves. Your body fat levels are low, and it's, whoa, we can't let these get too low because that's going to mess with everything, right? Things that we need for survival to keep going. And so that's what your body is going to prioritize over anything else. And people don't realize that body fat percentage is super important there. So I think the big thing being is your body fat levels are going to be more of a stressor on the body than the deficit itself, right? As I said, someone that is at sub 10% for men, sub 20% for women, doing more of a recovery diet versus a reverse diet is going to start to be, it's going to be a little bit more of a different conversation on there. So body fat levels are going to be huge and not just the deficit there. So again, this nuance matters more than just the math of the deficit. Outside of most competitors, most people don't need to worry about this level of leanness. So you can start to see where reverse diet's going to be a little bit better for someone versus a recovery diet. Number 6 is bigger priorities, which would be like your sleep, micronutrients, and stress. Instead of hyper focusing on calorie levels, I care more about someone's circadian health, their micronutrition quality, training recovery, stress management, and sleep consistency. To me, these are the bigger levers at play here that can be more more influential on recovery and long-term results than just calories. So what I mean by that is, yes, I think that in theory, going from a deficit to maintenance could be helpful from a recovery standpoint because your body is out of the deficit at that point. But if you take someone who is maybe not super lean, I'm more concerned about their recovery and overall health and getting that in check before we overly focus on, oh, hey, it's the deficit that is causing the problem here. So getting those in check first is going to be a higher priority than the deficit, right? So we could slowly ramp up our calories, but working on these, we're in a good spot there. Whereas you could take it both ways. If you're reversing up, but these are off, the issue is your lifestyle factors are off. But same thing, if you do a recovery diet and these things are off, now you're probably, again, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot as well, too. You're not going to get the most out of that. So to me, these levers are the most important at all times, but they often get overlooked and people place calories and the energy balancer in over these lifestyle factors that really are going to have the bigger impact on your recovery and again, how stressful the deficit is and the stress it puts on your body. So based on all this, what's my approach? How do I typically do this post-diet phase? So I don't advocate for tiny micro increases, okay? So I'm not saying with a reverse diet that you need to increase your calories by 25 calories or 50 calories a week. I think that's too cautious in most cases, but it's also such a small increase in calories that we talked about the how calorie tracking is off anyways. That's just the margin of error of calories within that margin of error of calories anyway. So it's like you may not even be doing anything. So to me, it's not really even worth it to do a super small amount like that. And saying that, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like maybe that is an approach I would take with somebody in some specific situation. So I don't want to say that would never happen. The likelihood of that would be low just because knowing how people are not very good at tracking there. But I also don't just default to big jumps to full maintenance. I think it depends on the person, right? I prefer a middle ground here. Again, for people that are not bodybuilders and aren't super lean. So again, we have to take that into consideration. But I prefer a middle ground though of increasing calories anywhere from 100 to 300 calories per week. And then from there, we want to monitor biofeedback, behavior, training performance, and body comp, but then also pair it with scale weight and see what happens. And then adjust as needed with flexibility and awareness this period of time is tough for them because they've never really focused on increasing their calories. It's a weird thing. It's the reverse of what they've come to know. And a lot of people are, if they do lose body weight, they're super, as much as we want to say it's not a big deal, like a big deal, people are worried about gaining body fat back. And as much I can say, hey, if you do these things, you're going to be good. It still is there's a mental hurdle that people need to get over. And I feel like if we just go, oh, hey, so-and-so says you need to go to a recovery diet and now you do it. And then they have all those things that we talked about earlier. And then maybe their scale weight goes up. Now they're going to be the person that goes back. So it's, yes, in theory, we should get over that and we should work on that, but that's not the case. It's easier said than done. And that's not working with human psychology on there, working with a person. And so I like to slowly increase up and see what happens. Again, focus on all these things, adjust as needed with flexibility and awareness. So if let's say someone is a mom, they're 45, they lost a good amount of body weight, but they've never increased their calories. They're worried about doing it. I'm not going to be like, oh, hey, you need to go straight back to maintenance. Maybe they're at a good body fat percentage, 22 to 25%. They're a lot leaner, but they're not shredded they're not sub 20%, 18% as a competitor would be. And we look at their biofeedback and their biofeedback's in a good spot. Their digestion's fine. They're feeling good. They don't have any of the diet fatigue that we would look at it. So that person I'm going to slowly increase them back up to just dip their toes back into it, see what happens, monitor their body weight. If we do 2 weeks and their body weight starts to trend back down, all right, now we need to increase their calories again. If we do 3 weeks and their body weight stays about the same, now we have the option to potentially increase calories a little bit or stay here for a little bit and monitor biofeedback, right? People have a little bit more wiggle room than they think here with this. If someone gains a bunch of weight in the first week, we're going to keep things the same and just watch and see what happens. Maybe it's oh, hey, you know what? They actually went way over because they had X amount of food or whatever. It's like, all right, let's stay here and work, dial that in, and then we can see what happens versus, oh, hey, we're in a recovery diet phase. You need to keep pounding in the calories to get in because you need to be at maintenance. And then they don't feel good about that. And then that can become problematic, right? So this is why I think this type of approach for most people, especially if you've never done this before, is the right way to go versus just going straight into a recovery diet. Now, in saying that, there's a key distinction here. Recovery diets can work well, but they tend to me, in my opinion, they tend to be better suited for lean physique competitors, people that are sub 8 to 10% body fat for men, 16 to 20% for women. But in my experience, most Gen Pop clients, especially those over 30, benefit from a more structured, flexible incremental bump in calories with biofeedback monitoring for best body comp and health outcomes and using that kind of approach that I was talking about earlier. But either way, no approach is magic. Reverse dieting isn't magical. You're not going to magically raise your total daily energy expenditure. You're not going to be able to get to this point where you can eat 3,000 calories and still be losing body fat. There's no magic to it. That's not going to happen. Your maintenance calories is still your maintenance calories, but how we get back to that we have some more wiggle room than we think. But jumping to your maintenance isn't going to be the holy grail either. That could work for some people, but for a lot of people, I don't think it's the right way to go either. And I think it's I think it's better suited for lean physique competitors. But what matters most is context, behavior, sustainability, and health outcomes, not just calorie math alone and being like, hey, you need to get back to your maintenance calories here. So I hope this gave you some insight into what to do. Again, I'm going to typically lean towards the incremental calorie increase, like a more, again, it's a middle approach of, it's not like a reverse diet where you're just adding 50 calories a week, but it's also not, hey, we're going straight to your maintenance calories either or higher, because that is sometimes what you'll do with a recovery diet. Again, the goal of the recovery diet is to get people out of, if they have a lot of diet fatigue and they've had a deficit and they're super low body fats, like getting some body, like that person needs to put on some body fat. And so that's where, again, you could use a recovery diet to help get them there sooner versus milking out this like super long reverse diet at lean body fat percentages. And that is going to prolong your recovery process. But if you take someone who isn't super shredded, body fat being the big thing at play here, we have more wiggle room. And especially if we're monitoring it with biofeedback and understanding that if that person has some potential thyroid issues, some potential gut health issues, like we can manage those things on the way up versus just being like, nope, you got to do the recovery diet there. So hope this gave you some insight into that. Let me know if you have any questions on this topic. You can reach out to me on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. And then if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. Talk to you guys soon.